All right. So good afternoon to everyone. Good evening if you're in Europe. I'm Shara Wasserman. I'm Director of Exhibitions at Temple University Rome. And I'm delighted to welcome you to Temple Rome's online gallery of art and to our exhibition, Mapping of Friendship, Joyce Kozlov and Simonetta Mauro, and a conversation with the artists. This event is organized with the participation of the American Academy in Rome. I wish to thank the artists, the audience, the Gallery of Art team at Temple University Rome, and the American Academy for working with us to bring two of their fellows back to Rome together. In 1999-2000, Joyce was at the Academy as a recipient of the Distinguished Rome Prize, and Simonetta as a recipient of the prestigious Italian Fulbright Fellowship in the Visual Arts. At this time, I would like to introduce and pass the mic to Elizabeth Rodini, the Andrew High School Arts Director at the American Academy in Rome, who will say a few words. Elizabeth? No?
Sorry, I was muted and could not unmute. Thank you, Shara. It's a terrific honor and so exciting to be here for what is this really, really wonderful digital exhibition, virtual exhibition. I got a little preview last night. And I just wanted to say, last night we had a virtual orientation for next year's fellows. And the topic came up of the relationships people will make at the Academy. And I was able to point to this project and show how enduring and important these friendships are. Of course, the Academy is a place where people come to get to know Rome and spend time on their work. But the community that's built here is really a key part of this legacy. And I think what we're seeing tonight is a really excellent example of that. So I want to thank Shara Wasserman and Temple University Rome for putting this together, for involving us, for involving our former fellows. I want to congratulate Joyce and Simonetta for wonderful work. And I'm just really excited to hear what they have to say and to walk through this virtual space with you. So thanks very much on behalf of the American Academy and also our new director, Avinoam Shalem.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. In fact, mapping and friendship are the key words in this show. Joyce and Simonetta met and became friends around their common interest in cartography. And as you'll see soon when we enter the show and talk to the artists, that they have a lot in common: a meticulous attention to detail, a use of source material, extensive travels, an interest in history, an approach to mapping as a way of understanding, a commitment to political, urban, and social issues. The exhibition presents new works by Joyce Kozlov, created during the last year, since April 2020, at the height of the COVID pandemic lockdown. And although we will find familiar the themes that she addresses of political aggression and world conflicts, and her use of military maps and historical source material, the results are novel. Actual Civil War battle maps created by officers on both sides of the conflict are appropriated, adapted, painted with meticulous detail, texture, and color into expressive paintings. The works by Simonetta in this exhibition are a recent series of cartographic paintings on mylar, a material known for its reflectivity and transparency, made for site-specific commissions and shown publicly here for the first time, along with rarely exhibited monoprints made by the artist during her fellowship at the American Academy. Together, this body of work reveals Simonetta's investigation of the geography of place, a familiar and distant, communicated to us through the technique and the material. A brief introduction of the artists. Joyce Kozlov is involved in both public commissions. The current project, which connects to the works in this exhibition, is for the new federal courthouse in Greenville, South Carolina, Memory and Time, which will be installed this June, and in her studio practice that encompasses painting, sculpture, printmaking, and photography. She has exhibited widely in the US and internationally, and her works are included in distinguished public collections such as the Brooklyn Museum, the LA County Museum of Art, MoMA, the Met, the Whitney, and so on. Simonetta Mauro is an Italian-born, New York-based visual artist with a focus on painting, drawing, and printmaking, and whose artwork has been exhibited in the US and abroad. Simonetta's research on cartographic aesthetics informs many of her works and academic papers, and is the subject of a book forthcoming by Routledge, Mapping Paradigms in Modern and Contemporary Art, Poetic Cartography. The book also includes a discussion of Joyce Kozlov's work. Simonetta is a director and associate professor at the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts. So now please join me in entering the show. And as I said at the beginning, please feel free to ask questions, audience, and we'll share those questions with the artists as we walk through the show. So you see here two images of the American Academy photographs at the time. And the first question I'd like to ask Joyce to start talking about the work is to have some recollections about her experience at the Academy. Joyce?
Well, if you want to move in a little bit to the image, at the end of the year, many of you know, the fellows have a group show, and I did a series of small globes that year, and I utilized little pillars that I found at the academy and placed them around the cortile, the courtyard. And so that's my reflection back. I wanted to say something that no one else is going to say. That year, Simonetta was the youngest fellow and I was the oldest. She was 27 and I was 57. And that was 21 years ago. So you can do the math. We were both mapping at that time, and we still are. And now, and for many years, we both live in New York. And I mean, that was just, you know, anyone who's ever been there for that year, it's a wonderful transformative experience in every way. Anyway, I made sculpture that year. I made these globes, and I'm a painter, and I don't think I've made sculpture since. But there's something about being there that allows you the time and the resources to do things you don't often do. But
I think we all remember that wonderful big three-dimensional sculpture. A walk into, you know,
yeah,
yeah.
targets. I made it at the American Academy. Anyway, what I'm going to do, and I'm talking fast, is move just around the room, going right, and try and talk about these paintings. And your introductory remarks were very helpful. They are based on maps of Civil War battles that were made during the time of the war by officers on both sides. And I got very interested in the American Civil War in recent years because we appear to still be fighting it. And in the past, I've dealt with American history and I've dealt with war and military history, but not this particular war. And I'm also working in South Carolina, and it's the first time I've been involved with the American South. I'm from the North. Anyway, what happened as I started to think about, okay, I have these maps of the battles. What am I going to do to make them relate to our current moment? And what I ended up doing is putting viral outbreaks on them. So you will, you know, we're not getting in that close, but you can see this first one is the Battle of Jackson, Mississippi in 1863. It's a federal map and it was a Union victory. And the other thing is the kinds of drawings that these original maps were that I appropriated vary, because they were some of the people who made them who were in the armies. They were officers, or they were soldiers. Some of them were cartographers, some of them were artists, some of them weren't. So that was my starting point. And each one is a different battle. You can move to the next one. Yeah, I mean, this one is the Battle of Chancellorsville, 1863. This was a Confederate victory, and it's a Union federal map. In Virginia, a lot of the battles were in Virginia, and this was a big defeat for the Union Army. And so, you know, I just wanted to say that people think that maybe these viruses are put in places where there was actual disease. No, that isn't the case. They're a metaphor for what I consider the kind of underlying disturbance in our country historically and today, which erupts at different moments.
Joyce, could I interrupt you very briefly? I apologize. Somebody asks if you could talk about scale briefly a moment, give some
the
dimension.
Scale in the show is the scale in my studio. These paintings are in my studio. They haven't left my studio. They're in process, actually. So that is the actual scale of the paintings. You know, and this was a kind of cool thing. I never did it before, doing a virtual show. You could make them any size, you can put them anywhere you want on the wall, but I did it very traditionally. So if you go back to the one we were talking about, aren't the dimensions on there? Yeah,
they are. We have to just get closer to see the label.
Yeah. So that's 50 by 65 inches. And some of these maps are very, very detailed, and mostly what they're detailed in is names. And I had to use a magnifying lens, and I have old eyes, and that was the hardest part because I don't know, I'm compulsive and I wanted to get all the names in. But writing the names in was very evocative and interesting because they're the names of people who live there, not necessarily towns, like Dr. Miller, Mrs. Smith, you know, and I think that was information. I think that was information that.
Oh, Joyce, you muted yourself.
Oh,
and I asked please that the audience mute themselves so that we don't, yeah.
All right, I don't know how much was missed. I was just saying that when I copy the names on it, they're names of people, people's houses. And I think for the military, knowing who lived where must have been useful. But one of the things, I'll mention this, let's move on to the next one because I'm worried about time.
Oh, don't worry.
No, this is the Battle of Chattanooga, which was in Tennessee, and it was a later one in 1865. And it was a Union victory. I don't know if all that information is important, but it was made by a captain in the Federal Army. And I have to say, I always put the viruses in last. I paint everything very slowly and meticulously, and I put off putting in the viruses because I don't like to look at them. I don't like to paint them. I myself had COVID in March 2020, and I started painting these right afterward. And I know people who died, but for some reason, and I wasn't sure when I did it the first time, whether it was a good idea to introduce them, but I felt compelled to do it. And like on this one, the big circle, the big virus, there is a circle in that map with information about that battle. And I just decided to utilize it and amplify it. And this map was a light on dark map. And it was a process that they used where they put a print in the sun. It's called sun printing, and it's like becomes like a negative. And that sort of cued me into making this one a light on dark image. So next. This is Appomattox Courthouse, and any of you who went to school in the United States and had history and geography, you know that that is where the armistice was signed at the end of the war. And this is a smaller painting, and the map itself was made in 1866. It was a commemorative map a year after the war ended in 1865. But I chose this image of the viruses. I found them all on online by just Googling, of a kind of explosion, like fireworks. Can you move in any closer? Maybe not. You have to come and see them in person, people. They're, you know, it's like at the end of the war, it's a tragic war and so many people died. But there's always a celebration at the end because it's over. And I wanted to introduce that in this one. And then move on to the next one.
Joyce, people are asking mediums, so would you like to answer? There's the question.
Sure.
So they'd like to know the medium, the technique.
Oh, it's acrylic on canvas. That's all. Now this one, this is Fredericksburg, and it's an early battle in 1982. It was Confederate Victory. This is the first painting I did. And they're all here in my studio. It's brighter than this, a lot brighter than this. But why does it have a grid? Very few people have been in my studio. We didn't have studio visits this year, but friends and family members, they think it's a quilt, and that's an association people have. But I always grid up my source and copy it square by square, and these I did a different way. But the first two, this one and Hampton Bays, I had gridded them up, and then when it happened, I realized I could have them scanned and printed on canvas, which I did, and I painted over it. And instead of drawing and copy it square by square. I saved myself a lot of time in transferring the information. But when I printed it, the grid was still there. So that's how I used it. And this was a very simple map compared to some of the others. And for me, I need a lot of, I need to build up a kind of tactile surface to feel like it feels like a painting coming from a drawing. So the actual grid kind of gave me a clue as to how to do it, how to paint it. And the next one we can go to is the Battle of Shiloh. And if any of you know the history of the American Civil War, this is a Confederate map, 1862. It was an early Union victory, but it was one of the bloodiest battles. It was a massacre on both sides. So I introduced some particularly scary, gruesome viruses into this one. And I don't really like to look at it myself. But the map itself was a very simple one. I think that somebody carried it in their they carried these in their pockets during the battle, and there was mistakes in some of them, which caused one army or the other to lose a battle because they didn't have the kind of cartographic devices we have today. So it was drawn by hand and drawn by memory and drawn by walking and surveying during battles. Some of these were surveying the land during the battles. Okay, next. And this is the other one, the second one that has a grid on it too. It's a little more subtle and hard to see. This is the Battle of Hampton Bays. And this was a naval battle, and this is a map that was wrong. The placement of the river was wrong, and there's you can't get up close, but there's a little dotted line where the real river somebody added afterward. But this was the battle we all studied in grade school of the Monitor and the Merrimack, which was the Battle of the Ironclads, and both sides claimed victory, but it changed naval warfare totally worldwide. So it was very important. And I put those little viruses where the battle took place in the river down below. Can you, down below the dark blue circles? Yes. And we can't move in, but I actually painted the Monitor and the Merrimack in there. I guess we can move to the next one, which is Vicksburg. And this was 1863. Yeah, this is the one that was surveyed under fire, and it was done by a US Coast Guard surveillance team. It was a Union victory. It's in Mississippi, and that's the Mississippi River. And this was just a beautiful drawing. So when I started with a beautiful drawing, it was like such a gift. And then the thing that I felt charged to do was to enhance it further and really make a beautiful painting from it. So I don't know what else to say about it, but this is maybe my favorite in the series. And it's right behind me in the studio.
Can you move your screen to show us? Can we see it in the back?
It's going to look exactly like what you see.
I see a little corner of it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, and that's Hampton Roads. I'm going to go back. Am I overdoing my time?
No, a few more minutes, but Elizabeth Rodini has a question. She says, if you could talk about the color schemes, which are so varied, and can you say something?
Oh, I tried really hard. Not only you're hard to see because it's the same thing. It's a battle and viruses on it. And usually I have more than two themes in my work, overlays. So I really tried to, when you're painting maps, very often you end up with like the traditional color, the land is green, the water is blue, or they're like signifiers. And as I went on in this series, I just wanted to treat them more like abstract paintings and use any kind of color to vary the color palette. And not only the color, but the paint treatment, which there's all different kinds of paint treatment in these paintings, which are not visible. But anyway, this is Bull Run. There were two battles of Bull Run. And they were Southern victories, both of them. And they were very early, 1861. This map was drawn by a Southern private. And, you know, some of these battles were fought in places where the soldiers knew people. Anyway, this was another very, very harsh battle. And you see those like little lozenges going around. Those are the way they indicated troops. So you can move to the next one. Oh, we're almost done. Okay, this is Gettysburg, and you can't move in closely. This one has the most names on it. Those are names. And all the roads converge on Gettysburg in the center. Can you see that? Like Rome. So everybody knew that that battle was going to take place there, and the troops were coming in from all the routes. And this map very, very well indicates it. Instead of putting viruses all over it, I had one big one erupting from right near there. It's a Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard survey map. It was the Northern Victory, and it's where Lincoln delivered the Proclamation of Emancipation. But one of the things I mentioned to you guys in conversation yesterday is you sit there and you're writing these words, and I'm looking at my magnifying lens, I'm going to my computer at the scan and blowing it up and trying to figure out what these words are. And they're all Anglo-Saxon names. And I realized that 150 years ago was before all the waves of immigration from all other parts of the world and even other parts of Europe came to this country, that each one had to go through the trauma of people, the way people reacted to them. But at this time, whether the map is, and these maps are from the north, south, and west, because the battles were all over the country, the names are all Anglo-Saxon. Anyway. So that's Gettysburg, and I have one more, which is New Madrid. And
there's one question that you might also want to address. I don't want to interrupt, I apologize. Are you choosing, from Elizabeth Dunbar, are you choosing maps primarily based on content or based on aesthetic composition?
Both. I wanted to cover all the major battles. I'm now working on the ones that's behind me in the studio is in progress. There are no viruses on it yet, and it's not finished. It's a very detailed one, which is Petersburg. I wanted to cover all the major battles. I don't want every minor skirmish, and I feel like I'm coming toward the end of this series. I don't like painting the viruses, but anyway, the next one is Antietam, which was the bloodiest battle of the war. I haven't painted it yet. This is a much more vibrant painting in the flesh. And this is one that I like a lot, actually. New Madrid, which is island number 10. Can you see it in the river, where the river loops down and there's a little island in it? That's where the battle was fought. In the rivers, the battles tend to have been fought, a lot of them in the islands. That's island number 10, and it was a Union victory in 1862. So
maybe rivers do that, but it looks a bit like the Tiber in there with the little Tiber Island.
yeah, this was a very nice map to begin with also. I'm through now. I'm at the end of my.
So there's one question. There's a question from Liesel Fenner, who says that you have an interest in visiting these places as you've become so intimate painting the land. Oops, it just disappeared. I'm sorry. Painting the land forms and features.
Yes, last summer I had a plan with a friend to, there are about a dozen national parks that are Civil War battle sites, and they're tourist attractions, and I've never been to any of them. And I hear they're very beautiful and very moving. And my friend and I were going to go all over and do it last summer. Well, everything was closed, and I still would like to do it sometime, but I went ahead and did the paintings anyway, and I've seen pictures, and you know, and I know people who have been and who have talked to me about it, but no, I've never been to any of these places, none of them.
And there's one last question before we move into Simonetta. Two questions from Frank Martin, who says that in Greenville, South Carolina, oops, there too, it goes away. A project, is there balance between Confederate and Union victories represented? And the
No,
second question,
the project in the federal courthouse, it's a GSA project, is about labor and textile history in that region. But when I went down there the first time, which was about 3 years ago, do I have time to tell this little anecdote, or should we skip it? I was in my hotel and it was early in the morning before my meeting. So I went across the street. There was this huge graveyard, which went back to the 17th century and came up to the 21st. And in front, there were 100 small gravestones, and each one of them had a cloth, small Confederate flag next to it. And I realized those were the soldiers, and that someone, either veterans or family, were replacing those flags and keeping them fresh. And I started hyperventilating. I got scared. And I don't know, I had a physical reaction to that. I'd never seen massive numbers of Confederate flags like that. And now in recent years, they're all over the country, not just in the South. You know, but being a Jewish woman from New York, I got a little scared, but it was a very powerful thing for me. And it was the project that brought me down there. And I don't have time to talk about the project, which is also very interesting to me, but that's when I decided to look into the Civil War at that moment, which I never really followed very much.
so I think we should walk into Simonetta's room, and then we will collect, at this point, my colleague Barbara Kahn will collect the questions, and at the end, we can go back and see if there's time. We'll start with the photograph, as we did with Joyce, taken when Simonetta was at the American Academy in Rome in 1999-2000, and ask Simonetta to talk about her experience at the American Academy. Hi, Simonetta.
Thank you. Hi, Shara, and thank you so much for curating the show. I'm very, very happy to be here in the company of Joyce, who is not only a friend, but also a mentor. And especially at the time, you know, when I was at the American Academy, I was also studying for a PhD. So Joyce became quite involved with that process. And here I am in my messy studio, beautiful studio. I want to also thank the photographer, who is an artist living in Rome, Piero Pulkinen. I hope she's watching. Hi, Piero. She took quite a few pictures of me in the studio, and that's a friendship that started there too. Piero is originally from Finland, but has spent most of her adult life in Rome, and she has been a dear friend since then. So I want to thank her also for giving me the permission to use this photo. And so you can see I'm surrounded by all kinds of sketchbooks and drawings and prints. I was very much into the theme of the city when I was at the American Academy, and that's a theme that has stayed with me ever since. And I was also studying the Tower of Babel as a myth. That became the topic of my PhD dissertation and art project. And for me, what the Academy really did was, it's really hard to summarize it in a sentence, but to be part of that environment with such a generous spirit of sharing knowledge. I have never experienced that before. And just being able to sit at the table with so many artists and scholars, and everybody was so open. And I was really almost the only Italian there. There was another Fulbright fellow actually in art history. And for me as an Italian, that was a very unusual experience, because usually there are unspoken boundaries. You know, when you are young and you are entering an environment where people are more experienced, there is always that feeling of there being a hierarchy. And I didn't feel that at all at the American Academy. And that really changed my way of seeing things. So that's maybe the most important thing that I got from it. besides being able to make work
Mhm.
without any other worries, which is such a gift for artists. I think we can move to the left. Left. Thank you, Emily. And so these are actually 4 of many monoprints that I made while I was at the American Academy. And a monoprint, for those who are not familiar with it, is it's a print that has no edition. So they are somehow serial, but they never replicate the same image perfectly.
Simonetta, I don't want to interrupt you. People can't hear. They're wondering, could you turn up your audio a bit? Is it possible?
Is this
Thank
better?
you. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope something was audible.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. So I was starting with a plexiglass plate and then inking the plate, doing some drawing on it, which was mostly removing material. So you have to imagine starting with a surface that you can then draw into with sticks and other, very simple tools to remove the material, add something, and then run it under the etching press and pulling out this the sheets of paper with ink on it. And each of them is different because you never can replicate exactly. There's a funny story connected with these prints. While I was there, the Villa Aurelia was under renovation. The Villa Aurelia is a building, a beautiful villa, very close to the Academy main building. It wasn't open to the public, but we could go there as fellows and draw. And I was doing a lot of drawing of the villa. And one day I was poking around, more or less legally, I don't know, but I found this room where they had an etching press and it was totally abandoned. So I thought, well, maybe I can, bring it to my studio and use it. So I spoke with the director of the Academy. He approved the project, and I took the press into the studio. I, put it back in shape. And that's how I started making these prints. And these were the last months of my fellowship there. So I remember it was the summer of 2000. And I was happily back in my medium, which printmaking for me has always been one of my favorite medium, but I don't get to do it very often because it requires a lot of equipment that I don't have. So, and they're all based on a view of Rome, which is not an actual view of Rome as it is today, but it's based on a plastic model of the ancient city from the age of Constantine. So we're talking of 4th century AD. That can be admired at the Museo of the Civiltà Romana, or Museum of the Roman Civilization at the Eur quarter in Rome. It's a big model of how the city may have looked like at the time. I remember visiting that museum, and then I purchased the map that was based on that view. And I basically used that as a model to produce this prints. I've always been fond of models and miniature and renderings, architectural fantasies and so on. So that was kind of serendipitous. I made other prints out of that, but 2 more are shown in the other wall, but maybe we can't really jump around too much. So we'll get back to that.
No, I think she can now. I think.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So maybe
Thank
we
you,
can look at
Emily.
those 2 over there. Same series, but these are focusing on the Colosseum. So, and that's actually how the Colosseum looked like in 2000, where you could see the underground belly of the amphitheater because there was no covering. And Shara told me that now they're building the stage on top. So in the near future, it won't be able to have this view of the underground as I did. And the Colosseum is one of those places that is always sort of frightening and fascinating at the same time, and just very iconic. So I made a few. We can look at the other one.
You might like to hear that Barbara Rosenthal is commenting that these are luscious.
I like that word. Yes, thank you. I was also, making my own pigments. So these are a mix of graphite dust mixed in with oil. There's gold powder. There's a bit of experimentation with that too. I didn't quite like to use a straight color from the can. I think we can go back to let's go to the left and start with the Painting of Athens. Yeah, that one. So, Shara, feel free to interrupt me, if there are questions, or even Joyce, if you can.
Yeah, we're monitoring, and there are, comments, and Joyce also, but this is perfect. Thank you, Simonetta. Go ahead.
So I'm very happy to actually be able to show these works in this interesting new format, because these works were made on commission, so they have never been exhibited publicly. They exist in different parts of the world. They are inside office buildings, and each painting shows a map of the place in which they are located. So in this case, we are looking at Athens, Greece, and this painting is in an office in Athens. And the moment I finish them, they're out, and there's not a moment when I can show them in an exhibition. So I'm quite happy that we have the chance to see them here. The size is 40 inches high by 60 across. All these works are made of mylar. So mylar is a translucent material, as Shara was saying. It was used a lot by architects until recently, before they switched to digital media. And what is fascinating about mylar is that you can see through, but because it's coated in a particular way, you can't really see, it's not fully transparent. So it's translucent, but it also covers certain things. So these works, all of them are made with 2 layers of mylar, and there is an upper layer with holes. So that's why they're called oculi. And then there is a lower layer that has the actual paint on it. So you're basically seeing through the holes, revealing what's underneath. And what is underneath is showing, more vividly, obviously, when there is a hole. And the rest of the surface is kind of, veiled, which I like as both visually and also as a metaphor, for things that are visible in a city, but they're also covered up or concealed by history or natural occurrences where we can't really see the full story or the full history of a place. So here I was trying to highlight specific parts of Athens. And of course, you can recognize some of the monuments, ancient Greek monuments, and part of the cities that are more central or lively. The question about the color scheme that was asked, somebody asked Joyce, is interesting because I also try not to be too naturalistic in the color choice. And although, some of the green obviously refer to parks, there are also colors that identify points of energy. So I'm very interested in this idea of intensities in cities, which, goes back to other mapping practices that one can find in the Situationists, other artists who look at dynamic flows in a city more than, what's actually there. So it's a play between what's visible and what is not visible.
Michelle Lefaux would like to ask the technique. Is it acrylic? Could you talk a little bit?
It's a mixed technique. So there is, I work very meticulously, usually on a table, when the work is of a certain size. If it's bigger, then I work on a wall. And I use inks. So it's mostly ink, color pencils. So they're actually drawn, it's too bad we can't see them closely, but color pencils that are also water soluble. So I would go back with water and dilute certain lines. But it's mostly ink, pastels, color pencils, and graphite. Some of the areas that you see white are gouache.
Can you explain your use of Google Earth in realizing these?
Yes, and I know that you're also a user. That's what I talk about also in the chapter where I describe Joyce's work. Yeah, I began to use Google Earth because when I got these commissions, this is Washington, D.C. This was the first one. And actually, I made this right at the point of the election in November 2016. And I was telling Shara the other day that I had two maps. The first one was very dark. You know, it was kind of conjuring all those strange feelings at the time. And then I decided to scrap that and produce a more, I wouldn't say cheerful, but, you know, less dramatic. And so in many cases, I did not know the place. You know, of course, I had been to DC, but I had very little familiarity with the configuration, the topography of the city. So I always use a mix of historical maps, contemporary maps, and also Google Earth, just to get the details of certain buildings. You can appreciate how the White House and Congress, you know, there are certain buildings that are more detailed. So Google Earth is really fascinating to me because you can zoom in, you can extract some details and have a more realistic element in a picture that's otherwise quite abstract. And
ties into a question that Cynthia Stevens just asked you, if there's a difference in narrative as we look through the holes. And is the bird's eye view also the narrative, or does this get interrupted by the holes?
Good question. I like the idea of interrupted narratives because I don't think there is just one narrative, you know, in any place that we experience or observe or represent. There are points of ruptures, and perhaps, you know, those holes have to do with that too. Like, where are those points where we encounter something strange or unfamiliar, or where we discover something about the history that is not immediately apparent? So, yeah, I like that idea of ruptures. I don't want to get too academic here, but there is a sentence that Foucault invented in relation to heterotopias, and he talks about the fabric of the city, or, you know, more in general, an environment being punctured by holes. So that also is a good metaphor for time. You know, time and space are often this sort of holes where we fall into and we're transporting in a different dimension. I don't know. Maybe that answers the question. This is the same size as Athens, so they're exactly the same.
There's another question that you can go to the next work. I think this question might be general to Simonetta. In the richly layered technique with its play between transparency, translucency, and opacity, is representation of the map a metaphor for civilization, site specificity and history, human self-awareness, and collective knowledge?
Yes, all the above. You named it. Yeah, and I think that's what both Joyce and I find fascinating about maps, is the fact that they convey so much more than just a terrain, right? There's so much in there that you can read and you can find and extrapolate. So, for example, in this series of the 5 continents, again, this was another commission. And remember, you know, when you have a commission, you have to sort of adjust your decisions to what needs to fit the space and so on. So I came up with five pieces. And the question came up, you know, what do you focus on when you represent the continents? And you don't want to necessarily revert to the usual discrimination of boundaries the way we are used to in maps. So I thought, you know, I would not really consider political boundaries, but I will focus on the natural boundaries, such as, mountain chains and geological strata and so on, and then highlight the cities. So the circles are highlighting major cities. Of course, you can recognize New York, Mexico City, and I have actually a little fun quoting myself in the Mexico City circle, because I made a map on Mexico City, which you will see later. And so there is like a mini, how can I say, mini citation reference of my own work. I'm talking of the lower circle on the map, that one, yeah. Los Angeles, San Francisco, other cities in Chicago and so on. So the idea sort of took form of showing the network of cities in the world, and maybe that sort of gives us a better sense of humanity, that we all live in places, big or small, and the political boundaries don't quite matter as much as that. The fact that we all share some common experience in the environment. So you can actually move through these, rather quickly. This is so the one we saw was North America. This one is South America. With South America and also Africa, there was a lot of ocean around that I had to sort of take into account. So I decided to, add some representation of old ships and other details that may be more mythological, just to create more interest around the image. And then there are details of cities. This is Europe. It was the most challenging because Europe is actually very dense. So there are many, many cities, and in a very relatively small area to accommodate. So I found that to be quite challenging. These are the same technique. So it's ink, mostly ink and color pencils on mylar on 2 layers. This one also includes North Africa, as you can see, parts of Russia. Istanbul is on the very far right. And these are kind of smaller. The size is 24 by 32 inches. This is Africa. Again, I had great fun looking into, traditional boats. You can see a couple towards the southern edge of the painting, and also on the right, upper right. For these, I used Google Earth a lot, and I can tell you sometimes there were some days in which I got lost just looking at places, totally fascinated. For this one, I was trying to also highlight the Silk routes in Asia, and I was studying old maps of the Silk Road or Silk routes, and then trying to superimpose them with contemporary terrain. It's just amazing what you can see, once you start looking at vast expanses of desert, lush forests, and so on. I love that way of traveling.
One last question about these, and then we'll open to general questions for both of you. But Ada Chinidio asks if these are commissions, and if so, where are they?
Yes, let's move on to the next so I can finish with the final. That's Mexico City. There are 4 panels. The screen you see behind me is actually, it's a photograph that I took in Mexico City at the Torre Vieres. It's a big tower in the financial part of the city. So they are in offices and of an investment company. And for this one, this was the most interesting to make, also the one that had, particular challenges because it's very, very large. Each panel is 64 by 42 or 40 inches, I forgot, in 4 panels. And I did a lot of studies on old maps of Mexico City, contemporary maps, Google Earth, in order to find a better, an ideal way to have an horizontal view of the city. So I had to tilt the actual orientation. It does not north at the top. And then you can see, if you look at the 3rd panel from the left, one of the central circles, that's the old, thank you, Emily, that's the old part of Teotihuacan, or the Zócalo. So it's the center of Mexico City. I hope I'm saying the word right. Maybe I'm getting confused with another part of Mexico, but so I was looking at the maps that the Spanish conquistadors actually drew, at the time when Mexico City was an island or a set of islands in the middle of a great lake. And so the blue lines that you see there are actually waterways that Mexico City used to have. So there is again an overlap between ancient and contemporary and other things in between. And the colors are very vivid because when I was looking at Google Earth, I could see there are parts of the city that are really, really colorful. And I hadn't been there at the time. So when I was able to finally visit Mexico City, it was quite a discovery, to see the city that I had drawn without knowing it. But drawing is another way of knowledge. So there's a certain way of owning a place by doing that.
Simonetta, there's a question from, I just lost the question. From Cynthia Stevens, who, to follow up and to get us back now to a conversation between you and your work and Joyce's work, is how does this relate to Joyce's narratives? So I think the question is to be thinking about how narrative aspects are in both of your works. I guess you can both answer to that one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if they relate to Joyce's narratives. I think we both have very different histories, and
They relate to narratives in some other bodies of work I've done much more than this current one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe it relates to the common.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joyce.
No, there are just many artists working with mapping and right now in so many different ways. It's kind of the way we transfer information in the modern world.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the sources we use sort of contribute to that narrative that gets developed, though, in different ways. I think our work is similar, but also very distinct. And it's interesting to me, it's fascinating to see how, two artists can use the same maps or the same sources, but then the outcome can be so different. It's never, and as Joyce said, there's so many artists using maps and they're all different.
And some people have asked if the circles in Simonetta's work are viruses, and I think, which they clearly are not, and she had no intention of that, but I think that's because they saw mine.
That's right, yeah. Well, you know what is interesting? This idea of a network of cities in the world, I think we realize how connected we are, with this pandemic. And
yes,
in a way, they're not viruses, but they do show how things really, go around and are part of one large system, if you want.
Joyce, there's a follow-up question for you from Cynthia Stevens, who says that in what way has narrative in your cartography painting process been entangled with your relationship to Simonetta and her different cartographic narratives?
You know, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is, to be honest, but I remember being fascinated by Simonetta's involvement with the Tower of Babel, going back to when I first met her and then in her PhD, and how she brought in philosophy, art, literature, how rich taking an image and a myth like that and developing it. And it's more of an architectural than a cartographic image, but I think both of us have been interested in architecture, or diagrammatic architecture anyway. Probably not the right answer to your question.
Well, there's a provocative question here from Heather Dunn, who says, are you looking at non-Western maps of Africa and other places? And I imagine this is a question for both of you because it doesn't specify which artist.
Well, I certainly have. But it doesn't relate to this body of work.
I did. I did not include them in the, I mean, actually, no, that's not true. There are some details in the world maps where I actually inserted in the circle some cartographical representations of cities that I found in, Chinese maps, for example. With African maps is a little different because, they have there are some diagrams and representations of villages and places, but they use a different language. And I wasn't always able to integrate that. Or maybe I just didn't think it was appropriate to integrate that in the work, because in the end, I want the work to look somehow coherent in a certain way. But I did make references to traditional boats, for instance, or I paid attention to some places that I also got from people who had been to certain parts of Africa and told me about them. So I also pay attention to that, which is not visible in the maps, but before I did the Mexico City map, not having been there, I asked a few people who had been there, what did you see? What did you travel to? What are some places I should include? And I got really nice responses from friends who also sent me pictures, of their travels. And I have a friend in particular who is also teaching at the New School in the Urban Studies program. And he sent me a lot of pictures that he took while he was there. So all that goes into the reasoning for the image, how the image is going to be in the end.
Elizabeth, Rodini asks if you're thinking about environmental matters as you look at these maps, or other matters for that matter.
This, yeah, I mean, I have a very specific body of work here. And I have been interested in environmental matters and other things that I've done, but this is really, I'm really dealing with the one thing in this body of work, which is a piece of American history that's still hanging around, and I would have to say no to that.
And Nona Hershey's asking again another provocative question.
I can also answer that one.
Sorry.
Not in this works particularly, but I did quite another body of work that had to do with a comparison between Venice and New York, and around issues of rising sea levels. And I did quite a few iterations of that project. It also involved a visit to the particular part in Brooklyn, where the phenomenon of subsidence is more evident. So I did work around that, but not exactly in this one.
And Nona's asking a question that I think we've discussed in the past about personal history versus historical sources. I ask first Joyce, and then of course also Simonetta.
Well, I feel that this You know, I'm in the middle of this body of work, and usually it takes some time afterwards to get to really understand what it was about. But I do feel that it's expressive of a lot of emotions and inner thoughts that I've had in this last pandemic year. I don't know if that's what the question was asking, but and the historic context, you know, I want to paint it in such a way that it doesn't look like an old map, that it looks like it was made in this time and that it's an expression of this time. So that's a kind of art challenge, you know, and I want to jolt that historic, musty old image into something that people might think about.
Simonetta, do you want to answer to that one?
It's a complicated question, but for me, the personal is always historical. You know, we are all historical subjects in a way, and particularly with the works on Rome, you know, my personal experience of Rome, I think, was part of the decision of choosing that subject matter and the sort of energy I was feeling at the time. All that goes into the making of the pieces, and even for the other maps, my involvement with history is personal. So, but at the same time, I also like to detach myself, you know, to a certain point, and really learn to observe and learn other things, you know, that are not part of my history. So, and I think that's part of what fascinates me about maps, is that you can look into other places, other people's stories, and it's not just about you, you know. It's about learning different approaches and other histories, and I like that.
We have one last, not exactly a question, it's a reflection. Again, Frank Martin, to everyone, so to both of you, is asking, in using images of maps, how do the ideas of territoriality, possession, control, conflict influence your choice of the map metaphor, or does design itself predominate in your choice? Joyce?
Well, that's what interests me about maps, is that they, it's one of the things that interests me about maps, is that who made it, and they're always about power. They're always about who made it, what country made it, the boundaries, the naming, all of that is who won the battle, who conquered the territory, who renamed all the places. That all of that history is embedded in the maps, and they come alive when you start thinking about it.
Yeah. I think for Joyce it's more evident, you know, particularly in this cycle of works that have to do with the Civil War. In my works, maybe I wasn't really focusing on that aspect, although you can see things, you know, somebody may notice, oh, why these cities and not others, you know, and why this concentration in this area and not in other areas. I think as artists, we can also point to things without necessarily impose a view. And I always felt that way, you know, about the work I make, that I don't necessarily follow an agenda, but I may show certain things, and sometimes they're hidden in details. So if you look really closely, you might discover something interesting that is not really very apparent. But I just don't want to give just one way of reading maps. You know, the process of interpretation and reading should be open and infinite, I think.
And in fact, Frank concludes for us the evening by saying that it's so interesting that you both, in different ways, are dealing with a human desire to know a place. Oops, I lost it now. by means of its symbolic representation and for different reasons, circle segments with oculi or viri as points of concentration and design focus points, interesting and unusual correspondences.
Is that Frank Martin?
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. And with that, I think we will adjourn. This has been marvelous. The artists will see everybody's questions and comments because they're on the chat and recorded. The exhibition as an exhibition from Kunstmatrix will be on the Temple University of Rome website, and the full event this evening will be on Temple University of Rome's YouTube channel. So you can all come back to it at your leisure and enjoy it as you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Shara. And I
Thank
look
you,
forward to
artists.
the chat. I'm sorry I couldn't pay attention to that, but thanks everybody for being here.
You will go back to the chat and enjoy it. Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you so much, Simonetta. And thank you, audience. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Shara.
Thank you, Shara. And thank you, Emily, for the wonderful tour.
Yes.
Thank you, Emma.
And Barbara and Elizabeth.